The studio lights burned bright as the cameras cut live. The audience buzzed with anticipation, knowing this wasn't going to be just another political back and forth. At center stage sat Representative Adam Schiff, his posture stiff, his expression locked in that familiar half-smirk he wore whenever he felt he had the upper hand. Across from him, Karoline Levitt leaned forward with calm precision, her hands folded over a neat stack of papers. Her demeanor was poised, but her eyes carried a quiet intensity that unsettled even the most confident opponents. Tonight wasn't just about another cable news debate, it was about credibility, truth, and who would own the moment. The moderator barely had time to introduce the segment when Schiff pounced. He raised his finger and in that cutting tone he often used to dismiss his critics, he spat out the accusation, "She's lying. Everything she's saying is fabricated, baseless. This is the problem with people like her, they invent conspiracies, they mislead the public, and they hide behind cheap theatrics." The room grew still. The audience, sensing a clash, leaned in closer. Viewers at home felt the sudden jolt of confrontation through their screens. Schiff had gone for the jugular from the start, branding Karoline a liar in front of millions. For a brief moment, Karoline said nothing. Silence stretched, and Schiff mistook it for weakness. He smirked again, tapping the table, signaling to the audience that he had already won. But Karoline's pause wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. She let his words linger in the air, heavy with arrogance, before she slowly reached down to the stack of papers in front of her. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady, cutting clean through the tension. "Congressman Schiff," she said, holding up a single page between her fingers, "you can throw labels around all you want, but I came prepared. And the truth doesn't bow to your theatrics." She flipped the page toward the camera, and the room lit up with gasps. What Schiff didn't yet realize, but was about to learn the hard way, was that Karoline hadn't come to trade insults. She had come with receipts, documented facts, and a line of defense so sharp that his accusations would collapse under their own weight. The audience sensed it. Schiff's expression faltered for just a second, and in that flicker, the entire balance of power shifted. The moderator leaned back, visibly unsettled, as the atmosphere in the studio thickened. Schiff, who just seconds ago was radiating self-assurance, now found himself staring at the page Karoline held up. He blinked, feigning indifference, but his body language betrayed him. One foot tapped anxiously beneath the table, a subtle rhythm of unease. Karoline didn't rush. She knew the power of timing, of letting anticipation tighten around the room like a vice. The audience sat in silence, waiting for her to reveal what was on that sheet of paper. Schiff tried to cut in, his voice raised and forceful. "This is a stunt, another distraction, another," but Karoline's hand shot up, commanding the stage with the confidence of someone who refused to be steamrolled. "No, Congressman," she interrupted firmly, her tone as sharp as a blade. "Theatrics are your specialty, mine? Evidence." She turned the page so the cameras could capture it in full. It was an internal memo, verified and time-stamped, containing Schiff's own staff communications, messages that directly contradicted the claims he had just hurled against her. Viewers watching at home could read the lines scrolling across their screens, acknowledgments of data Karoline had cited, warnings from staffers that Schiff's talking points wouldn't withstand scrutiny, and a blunt admission that the narrative being pushed was politically advantageous but factually unsound. The gasp from the audience wasn't just audible, it was visceral. Schiff's eyes darted left and right, as though he were searching for an escape hatch. He tried to recover, leaning toward the camera. "This is out of context. These are cherry-picked statements." Karoline didn't flinch. She slid another page from her stack, this one stamped with the official letterhead of a government agency. She placed it flat on the desk for the moderator and Schiff to see. "If you think that was cherry-picked, Congressman, wait until you see the whole orchard." The moderator's eyes widened as he read the line highlighted in yellow. It confirmed, in plain language, the very claim Schiff had mocked as fabricated. The audience broke into murmurs, some even clapping nervously as the realization spread. Karoline wasn't bluffing, she had built a case so airtight that Schiff's attempt to smear her as a liar was already collapsing in real time. Schiff's smirk was gone. His jaw tightened, his voice lower now, straining for control. "This is reckless. Dangerous. She's spreading half-truths to manipulate you." But the damage was already done. Karoline leaned back in her chair, the corner of her mouth lifting into the faintest smile. She didn't need to shout. The papers in her hand spoke louder than any accusation. And with each page she turned, Schiff's grip on the narrative slipped further away. The studio's energy had shifted completely. Just minutes before, Schiff was the one towering, directing the flow of the exchange with years of political polish. But now, he sat stiff, shoulders locked, as though every fiber of his being was fighting not to show panic. The moderator's face told its own story, caught between shock, curiosity, and the undeniable pull of a live scandal unraveling in front of millions. Karoline took a sip of water, slow and deliberate, before setting the glass back down. It wasn't filler, it was dominance. She was showing everyone she wasn't rattled. Schiff, on the other hand, leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly as he attempted to claw back some control. "Let's be honest," he said with a strained laugh, "this is the kind of circus act we see when someone is desperate for attention." The audience wasn't buying it. Karoline tilted her head, eyebrows raised, then leaned slightly toward him. "Attention?" she echoed. "I don't need attention, Congressman. The truth does that all by itself." With that, she pulled another sheet from her folder. This time, it wasn't just an internal memo. It was an email chain, authenticated and verified, showing Schiff's senior advisors discussing how to frame the narrative for maximum media impact, even if it meant disregarding verified intelligence. The words were chilling: "The facts don't matter, what matters is winning the spin." The camera zoomed in, audience members craned their necks. Schiff's composure cracked. His mouth opened slightly as if to object, but no sound came out. The moderator interjected nervously, "Congressman Schiff, do you want to respond to this?" He tried, fumbling with words. This is being weaponized. Anyone can take private conversations out of context," but Karoline struck again before he could finish. "Out of context? Fine. Let's put the whole thing in context." She lifted the entire packet and dropped it on the table with a thud, the sound reverberating through the studio like a gavel. The audience gasped, then broke into murmurs. Some even cheered softly, sensing the scales tipping. Schiff's face flushed red, he raised his voice, almost shouting now, "This is reckless. This undermines democracy itself." Karoline didn't blink. She leaned toward the camera, addressing not Schiff but the millions watching. "Democracy dies when truth is buried under lies. Tonight, the congressman called me a liar. But the real question, the one you need to ask yourself, is simple: if I were lying, why is he the one panicking?" It was a dagger, delivered with surgical precision. Schiff looked down, his hands tightening into fists. The moderator attempted to cut to commercial, but the control room hesitated, because the drama unfolding was simply too raw, too viral to break away from. The battle lines were drawn, and in that moment, America knew, this wasn't just another political clash. It was a reckoning. By now, the studio was no longer neutral ground. It felt like a courtroom, and Karoline had just turned the tables. Schiff, once the accuser, was now cornered like a defendant. The energy was palpable, viewers could almost hear the pounding of his heartbeat through the screen. The moderator's voice cracked as he tried to restore order. Let's bring this back to the question at hand," he stammered, but it was far too late. The narrative had slipped out of his grasp. Karoline leaned back in her chair, calm, collected, and unflinching. Every gesture was deliberate, every pause sharpened into tension. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her control over the room was undeniable. "For years," she said slowly, turning to Schiff, "you've stood on television and in hearings, pointing your finger at everyone else. You built your reputation on accusations, calling people traitors, liars, conspirators. But the truth always has a way of surfacing. She held up another sheet of paper. And tonight, Congressman, it's surfacing with your name written all over it. The camera cut to Schiff. His jaw tightened, and a thin sheen of sweat gathered on his temple. He attempted a laugh, a hollow, unconvincing chuckle that only made his discomfort more obvious. This is cherry-picking. She's spinning documents without context. Anyone can dress up lies as evidence, he muttered, his voice cracking slightly. Karoline's eyes locked on him, unblinking. Lies? She said softly. Then, louder, with steel in her tone, Congressman, the only lie tonight is the one you're telling yourself, that the American people can't see through this. The studio audience erupted. Some clapped, others gasped, but one thing was certain, they were no longer leaning toward Schiff. The momentum had shifted decisively, and every word Karoline spoke seemed to carve deeper into his credibility. The moderator, visibly sweating, leaned forward. Ms. Levitt, are you suggesting the congressman knowingly misled the public? Karoline didn't hesitate. I'm not suggesting it. I'm proving it. Right here, in front of the cameras, with his own team's words. She tapped the folder for emphasis, the sound echoing like a hammer striking steel. The congressman can try to shout, deny, or deflect, but receipts don't lie. For the first time, Schiff broke eye contact. He looked down, shuffling papers in front of him, pretending to search for something. It was the body language of a man cornered. Viewers at home recognized it instantly, the collapse of confidence. Then Karoline delivered the dagger. Leaning forward, her voice steady but sharp, she said, "You called me a liar. But tonight, Congressman, the liar isn't sitting in my chair. It's sitting in yours." The audience roared, this time not just murmurs or scattered applause, but full, sustained clapping. Schiff's face went pale. The moderator looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And the control room knew they had television history on their hands. For millions watching, the story had just changed. Schiff wasn't the man exposing lies, he was the man running from them. And Karoline, with every calm, devastating word, made sure the world would remember it. The studio had turned into an arena, and the tension was now unbearable. Every camera angle tightened on Schiff's pale face, capturing each twitch, each desperate flicker of denial. Across from him, Karoline sat unmoved, her poise unshaken, her words cutting like a scalpel. The moderator, realizing this wasn't just an exchange but a reckoning, tried to interject. "Congressman, you're being accused directly of misleading the public. Do you wish to respond clearly, yes or no?" Schiff adjusted his tie, a nervous tell that betrayed the weight pressing down on him. What Ms. Levitt calls proof is nothing more than selective leaks, fragments taken out of context. I've spent my career defending democracy, and I won't be smeared by manufactured outrage. The words came out forcefully, but they rang hollow. The audience didn't buy it, and Karoline knew it. She leaned forward, her voice steady, calm, and lethal. Selective leaks? Congressman, this isn't cherry-picking. These are your staffers' emails, your directives, your language. You didn't defend democracy, you manipulated it. And you did it while staring into the cameras, telling Americans you had the truth. Gasps echoed. A few murmurs of, "She's right," carried across the room. Schiff shifted in his seat, his composure cracking with each second. Karoline didn't relent. "You called me a liar. You built your name on branding opponents as liars. But look around, tonight the mask slipped. Tonight, the only liar exposed is you. And the only reason you're scrambling now is because you didn't think anyone would have the courage to call you out, with the evidence in hand." The moderator tried again, sensing the historic weight of the moment. "Congressman Schiff, do you deny the authenticity of these documents? Yes or no?" Schiff froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence stretched on, louder than any denial could have been. Cameras zoomed in. The audience leaned forward. The country watched as Adam Schiff, the man who had spent years demanding answers from others, couldn't muster one of his own. Karoline, sensing the shift, delivered the strike. She spoke softly, almost a whisper, but the words carried like thunder. America deserves leaders who tell the truth. And tonight, Congressman, you just proved you're not one of them. The audience erupted, clapping, shouting, the sound drowning out Schiff's weak attempt at rebuttal. The moderator sat back, stunned. The control room signaled to stay live. This was too explosive to cut. In that instant, the balance of power was gone. Schiff was no longer the authority, he was the accused. And Karoline Leavitt had just cemented herself not as a guest, not as a challenger, but as the figure who dared to strip away the facade on national television. The silence from Adam Schiff lingered like a crack in glass. It wasn't just hesitation, it was paralysis, the unmistakable look of a man who realized every escape hatch had been sealed shut. For years, Schiff had thrived on his ability to twist words, to drown opponents in rhetoric. But tonight, under the blinding studio lights, that armor had shattered. Karoline sat back slightly, her expression calm yet unyielding, as if she were the only one who had expected this exact moment. The moderator leaned in, almost whispering, but the microphone carried his words across the nation. Congressman, the American people deserve a straight answer. Do you deny that these communications are real? Schiff's jaw tightened. He stammered, I refuse to engage with documents whose authenticity cannot be independently verified, but before he could finish, Karoline's hand shot up, commanding silence, her voice slicing through his rehearsed line. Authenticity? These came from your office, Congressman. Are you really going to stand here and insult every viewer's intelligence? This isn't about verification, it's about accountability. And you've run out of both. The crowd erupted. Some clapped, others shouted, and the moderator raised his hands in vain to quiet them. Cameras caught Schiff gripping the edge of the desk, knuckles widening, his eyes darting to the floor as if searching for an escape route. But there was none. The truth had cornered him, and Karoline had the spotlight. She leaned forward again, her tone lowering, almost surgical. For years, you've demanded answers from others. You've dragged Americans through endless hearings, smearing names and reputations. But when it's your turn to answer a simple yes or no, you fold. That tells the public everything they need to know about you. It was brutal, but it was true. The audience knew it. The control room knew it. And Schiff himself knew it. Outside the studio, social media was already ablaze. Clips of Schiff's silence circulated within minutes. Headlines began to appear in real time. Karoline Leavitt corners Schiff, no answer given. Political analysts who were watching scrambled to adjust their talking points. What was supposed to be another routine exchange had turned into a live collapse of Schiff's credibility. Back in the studio, Schiff tried one last attempt at defense. This is nothing more than a coordinated attack. She's here to distract from real issues. But Karoline didn't let him finish. She cut him off cleanly. The real issue, Congressman, is truth. And you just showed America that when it comes to truth, you have none. The roar of the crowd drowned out his weak protest. Viewers at home felt it too. This wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. Karoline's composure, her precision, her refusal to back down, it was everything Schiff's critics had longed to see, and everything Schiff himself feared. And as the moderator reluctantly moved to the next segment, it was already too late. The story of the night was written. Adam Schiff had been unmasked, and Karoline Leavitt had been the one to do it. The debate stage had barely transitioned into its next segment, but the damage was already done. Schiff's silence and Karoline's precision had detonated like a political bomb. The control room was in chaos, producers whispering frantically into earpieces, executives barking orders about camera angles, and assistants waving signals to prepare for a commercial break. Everyone in that studio knew they were sitting on the moment of the year. Beyond the studio walls, the digital world was on fire. Within 60 seconds, clips of Karoline's takedown flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The first viral post came from a college student in Ohio who simply wrote, "Karoline just ended Schiff's career live on air." It had 50,000 retweets before the next commercial rolled. By the time the network cut back, hashtags like #Schiff shutdown and #Karoline Unmasked were already trending nationwide. Cable news hosts who weren't even part of the broadcast scrambled to adjust their coverage. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and independent commentators all seized on the footage, dissecting Schiff's frozen expression and Karoline's exact phrasing. Every pause, every syllable was replayed in slow motion, analysts circling his stammer like sports announcers reviewing a failed play. On one panel, a seasoned political strategist said bluntly, "In 30 seconds, she did what years of opposition research never could, she broke him." Meanwhile, Schiff's allies in Washington panicked. Staffers flooded group chats with messages like, "Get ahead of this narrative now." One aide leaked to Politico that Schiff had been ambushed with fake documents, but the spin collapsed almost immediately as screenshots of the documents were posted online, each stamped with his office's own headers. The receipts were undeniable, and the public wasn't buying excuses. Karoline, however, wasn't watching the chaos. She sat quietly at the debate desk, jotting notes as if she hadn't just redefined the entire evening. Her composure became part of the story. Not only had she dismantled Schiff, she had done so with calm, almost surgical precision. The contrast between her confidence and his unraveling couldn't have been sharper. In living rooms across America, families argued. Some longtime Schiff supporters muttered about cheap shots, but more common was the stunned recognition. If he really had nothing to hide, why didn't he just deny it? That question echoed across households, dinner tables, and late-night podcasts. By midnight, even comedians were piling on. One late-night host quipped, "Schiff couldn't find his words tonight. Luckily, Karoline found them for him, and she used them like daggers." The audience howled, and the clip went viral alongside the debate footage itself. For Schiff, it was a nightmare spiraling out of control. For Karoline, it was proof that truth still had the power to shatter carefully built facades. And for America, it was a moment no one would forget, a generational clash that felt less like a debate and more like an unmasking. The stage lights dimmed for a commercial break, and Schiff practically bolted from his seat. His aides trailed behind like shadows, clutching folders and whispering panicked strategies. Cameras weren't rolling, but every crew member could see the tension radiating off him. His jaw clenched, his hands trembling, he hissed to an aide, "How the hell did she get those documents?" His voice cracked in a way that betrayed both fury and fear. Backstage, the reality began to sink in. Reporters had already cornered his staff with questions they couldn't answer. One shouted, "Congressman, is it true your office signed off on those memos?" Another demanded, "Do you deny her evidence?" Schiff ignored them, storming into a private room where his inner circle had gathered around glowing phone screens. Every screen told the same story. Karoline's clip was everywhere. Some aides suggested immediate damage control, a press release denouncing her as a liar. Others pushed for a more aggressive tactic, label the documents fabricated, and lean on friendly journalists to amplify it. But Schiff knew better. He had seen the headers, the timestamps, the signatures. Denying them would only invite more scrutiny, and the truth was already leaking through cracks he couldn't patch. One aide, pale and shaking, muttered, "Sir, the networks are replaying the clip on loop. Fox is calling it a knockout. CNN's panel says it's a disaster. Even MSNBC isn't defending it." Schiff slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gavel, but it carried none of the authority he once commanded. For the first time in years, he was the one being cornered, and he had no script, no committee majority, no allies to run interference. Meanwhile, Karoline was still at her podium, chatting calmly with producers as if nothing monumental had happened. Her composure infuriated Schiff even more. To him, she wasn't just an opponent, she was a reminder of everything slipping away, the narrative control, the untouchable aura he had crafted, the legacy he thought was secure. A producer whispered in Schiff's ear, 2 minutes until we're live again. He felt the walls closing in. Returning to the stage meant facing Karoline again, facing her unflinching stare and the audience's fresh memory of his collapse. Yet retreating wasn't an option, leaving would look like surrender. He straightened his tie in the mirror, staring at his own reflection. The face looking back wasn't the confident statesman he once believed himself to be. It was a man rattled, exposed, and aging under the weight of his own contradictions. For the first time in a long career, he understood that no spin, no headline, no polished speech could erase what millions had just witnessed. And in that moment, Schiff knew something else: Karoline wasn't going away. She wasn't just another critic or a talking head. She had become his foil, his public reckoner, the one voice he couldn't silence, and the one adversary who had dared to drag the truth into the light. The cameras clicked back on, and the hum of the studio reignited like a switch. Schiff walked back to his chair with forced calm, but the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed the storm raging inside him. He adjusted his notes, cleared his throat, and tried to wear the mask of authority again. But it was too late. The audience, both in the studio and watching across the country, had already seen him unravel. No amount of composure could erase that image. Karoline leaned slightly forward at her podium, the corner of her mouth curling into a faint, knowing smile. It wasn't arrogance, it was confidence, the kind that comes when you know the truth is on your side. As the moderator reopened the discussion, Schiff attempted to cut in, launching into a tirade about baseless attacks and manufactured controversies. His voice was sharp, but it cracked under pressure, and the cadence that once carried him through hearings now sounded defensive, almost desperate. Karoline didn't flinch. She waited, letting him rattle through his talking points, letting the viewers hear the repetition, the lack of substance. When he finally paused, breathing hard, she struck with precision. "Congressman," she said, her voice steady and clear, "you can throw every accusation at me you want, but the problem is you can't deny the documents. You can't deny your signature. And you can't deny that you've been caught red-handed saying one thing to the American people and another thing behind closed doors." The words landed like a hammer. Schiff tried to interject, but Karoline raised her hand slightly, calm, collected, commanding. The moderator, sensing the gravity, let her continue. "This isn't about me. This isn't even about you. It's about a government that thinks it can say one thing to our citizens while plotting something entirely different in private. That's why people don't trust Washington anymore. That's why they don't trust you." The audience broke into murmurs, some nodding, others whispering in disbelief. On social media, clips of her rebuttal were already being clipped, captioned, and spread with hashtags demanding answers. Schiff's name trended alongside words like exposed and cornered. Meanwhile, Karoline's calm delivery stood in stark contrast to Schiff's scattered attempts at recovery. On stage, Schiff tried to reclaim the moment. "You're misleading the public. You're twisting," but Karoline cut in sharply this time, her voice slicing through his sentence. "No, Congressman. You did that yourself. I'm just holding up the mirror." The studio erupted, gasps, applause, even a few cheers that the moderators couldn't silence. Schiff sat back, his face tight, his eyes darting toward the cameras as if he could somehow salvage what was slipping through his fingers. But the truth was clear. This wasn't his stage anymore. It was Karoline's. And for the first time in his career, Adam Schiff looked less like the interrogator and more like the man under oath. The debate was supposed to end with the moderator's carefully scripted closing remarks, but by the time the cameras panned back to Schiff and Karoline, the script had already been torn apart. Schiff looked like a man searching for the ground beneath him, flipping through his notes as if one line, any line, could save him from the collapse everyone had just witnessed. His voice, once sharp and commanding, had shrunk into clipped phrases, hollow warnings, and rehearsed denials. Karoline, however, didn't need notes. She had the truth, and more importantly, she had the audience. She leaned into the microphone, her eyes locked not on Schiff, but straight into the lens, as though speaking to every living room across America. "This isn't just about one congressman caught in his own contradictions," she said firmly. "This is about an entire culture in Washington that thinks it can deceive the people and get away with it. Tonight, you all saw it for yourselves. And tonight, the mask came off." The line detonated. Gasps and applause thundered through the studio. Schiff tried to protest, raising his hand, but the moderator, sensing history in the making, let Karoline continue. She delivered her last words with the cadence of a verdict. "If he calls me a liar, let the record show who had to run from his own words. If he says I'm twisting facts, let the public decide who's holding the receipts. Congressman Schiff, the American people just saw the truth, and you can't hide from it anymore." Schiff sat frozen, his lips parted but no sound escaping. The audience erupted in a standing ovation, something that almost never happened in a debate setting. Even those who had walked in skeptical of Karoline couldn't deny what they had seen, one side dodging, sputtering, unraveling, the other standing strong, armed with evidence and conviction. Within minutes, the internet was ablaze. Clips of Karoline's final strike spread across platforms with captions like, "Karoline ends Schiff live," and "Receipts don't lie." Late-night pundits who once dismissed her were suddenly forced to replay the footage, frame by frame, acknowledging the unthinkable. Adam Schiff, the man who had interrogated presidents and CEOs, had just been dismantled by Karoline Leavitt in front of the entire nation. Karoline left the stage without gloating, her expression calm, almost solemn. She didn't need to celebrate. The victory wasn't in applause or trending hashtags, it was in the undeniable shift that had just occurred. Schiff's authority, long untouchable, had cracked. And the young woman he had mocked, dismissed, and underestimated had turned the lights on, leaving him exposed for everyone to see. As she walked into the buzzing press corridor, a reporter shouted after her, "Karoline, what do you call what happened here tonight?" She paused, looked over her shoulder, and delivered one last line, sharp as a blade. "I call it accountability. And it's only just beginning." The cameras caught it, the nation replayed it, and by morning, the story wasn't that Schiff had attacked Karoline. The story was that Karoline had put Schiff on trial, and won. Tonight, we witnessed more than a debate, we witnessed a reckoning. Adam Schiff came armed with rehearsed lines and accusations, but when the facts were laid bare, his words collapsed under their own weight. Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend herself, she turned the tables, holding up receipts that no spin could erase. What America saw was not just one politician being challenged, but the entire culture of deception in Washington being called out for what it is. Schiff labeled her a liar, but Karoline unmasked the truth. She showed that courage and conviction still matter, even in the face of power that believes it's untouchable. As the cameras went dark, one thing was undeniable: the old guard had been rattled, and a new voice had cut through the noise. Karoline left the stage not with applause in her ears, but with accountability on her shoulders. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new fight, one where the people demand truth, and leaders are forced to answer for every word. Tonight was more than a clash between two figures, it was a warning shot to the establishment: the mask is slipping, and America is watching.